It's 6 p.m. on a Friday, and you just found out 3 caregivers called in sick for the same shift. Your phone is already in your hand. You're scrolling through contacts, hoping someone picks up. You already know how this ends. Someone who worked this morning is coming back tonight, and you're paying them time and a half to do it. This happens more than you'd like to admit, and you've probably convinced yourself it's just the cost of doing business. But the real fix is far simpler than you think. Overtime feels like a staffing problem. It isn't. It's a forecasting problem wearing a staffing costume. Your facility doesn't run out of caregivers because caregivers don't exist. It runs out of caregivers because nobody saw the gap coming until it was already an emergency. And once it's an emergency, you only have expensive options left. Call someone in, beg someone to stay late, pay the premium. What if the gap had been visible 3 weeks earlier? Here's what almost every RCFE and ARF owner does instead. They build the schedule from habit. The same rotation, the same shift lengths, adjusted only when something breaks. It's reactive by design, and reactive scheduling always produces the same result. You overstaff on quiet days because you're nervous, and you understaff on hard days because you didn't see them coming. Both directions cost you money. One shows up as wasted payroll, the other shows up as overtime. Neither one shows up on a spreadsheet with a label that says this was preventable, so it just gets absorbed month after month as if it were weather. Let's slow down on that word, forecasting, because it's doing a lot of work here and most owners have never actually applied it to a schedule. A weather forecaster doesn't predict the future by magic. They look at thousands of past patterns and notice which conditions tend to precede which outcomes. Scheduling works the exact same way, except almost nobody treats it that way. You already have years of data sitting in your own records. Call out history, which shifts get thin, which weeks are worse. You just haven't had a way to read it at scale, because a human brain can hold maybe a season's worth of pattern before it starts guessing instead of remembering. Researchers have actually measured what unpredictable scheduling does to a workforce, and the results are not subtle. Joan Williams, a law professor at UC Hastings who runs the Center for Work-Life Law, ran what's now called the Stable Scheduling Study inside dozens of Gap stores. She didn't just study morale. She measured sales and labor cost directly across a real retail chain over real months. When schedules became more stable and predictable, sales went up and labor costs went down at the same time. Read that again. Predictability alone moved the number on the bottom line. Not more staff, not less staff, better timing. Susan Lambert, a sociologist at the University of Chicago, spent years studying what she calls schedule instability, and her research points at the same mechanism from a different angle. Unpredictable schedules don't just stress out workers. They quietly drain productivity, because a mind that's worried about next week's hours isn't fully present this week's shift. In a caregiving setting, that's not an abstract cost. That's a caregiver who's distracted during a medication pass because they don't know if they'll make rent. Is that a risk you're willing to keep carrying just because nobody's measured it yet? And there's a second layer to this, one that matters even more in your industry specifically. Anne Rogers, a nursing researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, published a study in Health Affairs back in 2004 that tracked hospital staff nurses working extended shifts. The finding was stark. The risk of making an error rose sharply once a shift crossed 12 hours, and it kept climbing the longer that shift ran. Your caregivers aren't nurses in a hospital, but they are doing safety-critical work on double shifts for the exact same reason those nurses were, because nobody planned the gap. So someone had to absorb it with their body. Fatigue doesn't announce itself. It just quietly raises the odds that something gets missed, a dose, a fall risk, a small change in a resident that would have been caught on a fresher shift. So the problem isn't that you don't care about your staff. You clearly do, or you wouldn't be scrambling to cover the shift instead of just leaving it open. The problem is that you're solving a prediction failure with a heroic solution, and heroics don't scale. Someone always eventually says no. And the day they do is usually the day something actually goes wrong. This is where AI actually earns its keep, and not in the science fiction way people imagine. Forget robots. Think of it as a very patient pattern reader, one that never gets tired and never forgets a single week. Feed it your past schedules, your call-out history, your census data, even the local school calendar if it correlates with call-outs in your area. It learns the shape of your risk. It notices that call-outs spike on the Monday after a holiday weekend. It notices that your night shift has thinner coverage margins than your day shift. Even though nobody built it that way on purpose, it just accumulated over years of small decisions. And then it does the one thing your gut can't do at 6 p.m. on a Friday. It tells you 3 weeks in advance where the gap is likely to open, while you still have cheap options instead of only expensive ones. Picture a small ARF, 12 beds, family-owned. The owner used to build next month's schedule the same way every operator does, by copying last month's and patching holes as they appeared. Overtime was eating roughly 18% of the labor budget, month after month, and it felt permanent, like weather. She started feeding her scheduling software 4 years of shift history, nothing exotic. Just data she already had sitting in spreadsheets she never looked at twice. The system flagged a pattern she'd never consciously noticed. Every third Sunday, tied to a local rotating pay cycle, call-outs jumped by nearly half. She'd never have connected wage cycles to no-shows in 100 years of guessing. The AI did, almost instantly, because it wasn't trying to remember. It was just counting. Once she saw it, the fix was almost embarrassingly simple. She added one extra part-time float caregiver on those specific Sundays. Scheduled weeks ahead at regular pay. No scrambling, no premium rate, no 6 p.m. phone calls. Within 2 months, her overtime spend dropped by more than half. Not because she hired more people, because she stopped finding out about the gap on the same day it opened and started finding out about it while it was still cheap to fix. Now here's the part that matters even if you've never run a care facility in your life. Every business with shift-based labor is fighting this exact same war, just wearing a different uniform. A restaurant loses margin on a slow Tuesday because it's staffed for a busy one. A retail store pays a premium for a last-minute closer because nobody saw the weekend rush coming. A warehouse burns overtime hours because the forecast was a guess dressed up as a schedule. A dental office pays a temp agency markup because nobody noticed their hygienist always requests the same week off every spring. The mechanism is identical everywhere you look. Unpredictability gets absorbed somewhere, and it's almost always absorbed as cost, either wasted idle payroll or panicked premium payroll. There's rarely a middle option once the gap is already staring at you. What changes with AI-assisted forecasting isn't the nature of the work itself. Caregivers still show up, shifts still need covering, tables still need bussing, shelves still need stocking. What changes is when you find out you have a problem. 3 weeks of warning turns an emergency into a plan. A plan is cheap. An emergency is never cheap, and it never announces itself politely either. Take a small auto repair shop, 4 bays, 6 technicians. The owner never thought of himself as having a scheduling problem because he wasn't running shifts around residents who needed round-the-clock care. But every summer, without fail, he paid out a wave of overtime the first 2 weeks of June, right when school let out and walk-in traffic doubled for pre-road trip checkups. He'd always chalked it up to bad luck, a busy season nobody could plan for. When he finally looked at 3 years of appointment data side by side, the pattern was obvious in about 10 seconds. It wasn't luck. It was the exact same 2 weeks, every single year, like clockwork. He hadn't needed a crystal ball. He'd needed to actually look at what he already had. One extra part-time technician, booked in April for those specific weeks, erased almost the entire spike. The information had been sitting in his own booking system the whole time. He just hadn't asked it the right question. That's really what AI forecasting is, underneath the buzzword. It's not intelligence in the way a person is intelligent. It's patience applied to your own history, at a scale no human has time for. You already own the data. You already lived through every one of those patterns once. The tool just remembers all of it at the same time and hands you the pattern back before it costs you money instead of after. You might be thinking this sounds like it requires some enterprise software budget you don't have. It doesn't. Most modern scheduling platforms already have this forecasting layered in, quietly, whether you've turned it on or not. The tool you may already be paying for might already be trying to tell you where next month's gap is. Have you actually looked at what it's flagging? Most owners haven't, because they've trained themselves to only open the schedule when something's already on fire, and a tool that whispers 3 weeks early is easy to ignore when nothing feels urgent yet. Here's the counterintuitive part, the piece that trips people up every time. You'd assume more staff is the answer to fewer gaps. It isn't. Gap Inc. didn't add headcount in that stable scheduling study. They just made the existing schedule more predictable and told people about changes further in advance. The lesson generalizes past caregiving completely, past retail, past every shift-based business you can name. The fix usually isn't more people. It's better foresight applied to the people you already have. That's a cheaper problem to solve than anyone expects once you actually see it clearly. Think about the last time your business absorbed an unplanned cost because you didn't see something coming until it was already happening. Maybe it wasn't a caregiver shortage. Maybe it was inventory, a missed order deadline, a customer service backlog that built up quietly until it was a crisis. Same mechanism, different department. Same late discovery. The businesses that stop bleeding money on reactive fixes are the ones that start asking a very unglamorous question. Where in my operation am I still finding out about problems on the day they happen instead of weeks before? Because here's the truth underneath all of it. It was never really about the caregivers who called out sick, or the schedule, or even the money. It was about how late you found out. Fix the timing, and the crisis stops being a crisis. It's 6 p.m. on a Friday again, 3 weeks from now, and for the first time in longer than you can remember, your phone stays quiet.